event in Santa Fe's history that's starting on time. Finally, I have the power. Okay. Welcome to the kickoff of the Fall 2017 Senior Reading Series. Make noise. I don't know, just like wait for applause, so that's what I need to do. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Julia Goldberg. I'm a faculty member in the Creative Writing and Literature Department at Santa Fe University of Art and Design. For those of you who are just joining us, our senior reading is a series that is a part of a capstone class at the school where the students spend 4 years writing in all different genres, and then they spend 3 months revising, workshopping, designing, making covers. And as of this morning, they uploaded their senior books, and they were all going to be very beautiful. So a little bit of housekeeping. Tonight is the first of our reading series. We will be back here at 6 p.m. Tuesday, December 5th, 1 week from tonight, for our second and final senior reading series featuring Kelsey Mogodospor, Charlotte Rankin, and Allison Gamache. Did I get that right, Kelsey? No, not even close? All right. I had Kelsey record her name into my phone this morning and practiced it all afternoon, so that was time wasted. And then you can see their really beautiful books will be displayed in a book sale at 1 p.m. Monday, December 11th in Fogelson Library. So please come if you're in town, and if not, I'm sure that all of our writers will let you know exactly how to buy their books. Tonight's readers are Chantal Mitchell, Kylie and Yockey, Madeleine, Sardina, and Brantlee, Reid, and they will be introducing each other, and I don't want to step on them so much. And before I forget, I do want to make sure we thank Collective Works Bookstore for hosting us. It's the first time they've done so. Really appreciative to have them here. They've always supported all the writers in our SFUAD community and the larger Santa Fe community. It's so great to be in this beautiful bookstore and not have to set up for ourselves. I thought was also very exciting. So that was cool. So I just want to say, I don't want to step on the individual introductions, but I just want to give you a little bit of information. I know that tonight's writers have family and friends, fans, teachers here tonight, and they've all done you really proud. They've worked somewhere on the scale of conscientiously to obsessively. Okay. Just go back to what you're doing. On their manuscripts, they've been really supportive and smart with one another's work. Brantlee Reid's work, she'll be reading tonight, whether it's her poetry or her fiction or her nonfiction, deeply considered, observant. She offers brooding and always just aggressively wordsmith observations of the world around her. I'm really excited you get to hear her work tonight. Maddy, Sardina, for those of you who don't know, a few weeks ago I suggested we wear t-shirts that said WWMD, what would Maddy do? Because she's just like, no matter what's going on, I always just look to her and she's very calm and just knows what's going on. And yet her work is so imaginative and lively. She's already had so much success as a writer, winning contests, working on, she's vice president of the Student Writers Association. She will be an editor of Glyph this semester and last semester. She has pieces out all over in the world, and she's just such a brave and fun and wonderful person. Kylie and Yockey, am I also pronouncing your name wrong? That's horrible things. I've forgotten what everybody's name is all of a sudden. After telling everyone there was nothing to be nervous about. Be nervous that you won't remember anybody's name, I should have said. Okay. When the semester started, everyone said, oh, Kylie should workshop first because she's been working on her manuscript for 2 years. And I thought, that sounds like an exaggeration. And yet she just came into class with this basically pristine manuscript. I don't know what she's been doing for the last 3 months. It was just like coloring her hair because she was ready to go. So her manuscript is beautiful. She's sort of like anywhere from just very funny to macabre, magical realism, exploring everything from experiences of the body to sort of imagined historical events. And I have the honor of introducing one of our writers tonight, Ms. Chantal Mitchell. Chantal Mitchell. So I want to say, just it's going to be very hard to do her justice in 2 minutes, but just as a person, Chantal is deeply funny, and she's kind and observant and adventurous, and her work is exactly the same. She mines nature, she mines spirituality, she writes poetry and fiction and nonfiction. Her poetry is deeply sensory, often rooted in imagery from nature. She explores metaphors of spirituality and human experience. Her nonfiction draws on Chantel's just deeply inquisitive nature. They always say the cliche is about write what you know, but in Chantel's case, it's a good advice because she knows about all sorts of weird things, like food and K-pop, even though she won't actually explain to me what that is. Her nonfiction, she goes deeply into her personal experiences. She writes about Las Vegas. She writes about singing in the choir. Everything she writes about just takes on this new life. And although Chantelle is not going to read from her academic work, I'm probably the only person who would have thought that was a good idea. She's just so deeply smart, and she has written things about essays and books that I knew so well, and found new ways of looking at them and new questions to ask about them. And I think that just is how Chantelle is. Her work is so open and inquisitive, and she always finds new ways to look at things and talk about them. So please welcome our first reader, Ms. Chantal Mitchell. This has to be like 12 feet taller now.
That's fun. Thank you.
Yes. I'm nice and bit sensitive, just talk right into it. Second.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes? Hello? Hello? Okay. So I'll be reading a piece of fiction titled Ossuary. Sandstone cathedrals, towering cinnamon mounds jutting up into the sky on an otherwise unassuming and vastly empty dirt plain. A creamy monolith with its eye on me. The slithering of desert snakes and centuries-old bones rattling just inches underground, where they've shifted up and up throughout the years, slowly creeping in search of calcium-rich sisters. It's hot, but the hairs raise on my arms and neck like texture tattoos, dry leaves etched onto my forearms, a glyph of goosebumps on my wrist. Everyone says the desert is lonely, but that's just because they forget their kin in the sand who were buried and forgotten and are rotting with scorpion tails and coyote teeth. The sun is at its peak, and so is the strumming in my chest. It's Monday. I should be in my cubicle coffin, dead with eyes open after 2 cups of coffee, holding a bouquet of invoices. Instead, I'm using my bare fingers to dig into the red sand, looking for my mothers and brothers and children. I don't have permission to enter the bone city beneath me, but I'll force my way in. I miss my sister. I know she's at work now, doing what she loves, existing in a place where people have reason to exist, far away from me. I'm tired of looking for a purpose. Instead, I'll become one. The toughness of the bone can be partially attributed to things called sacrificial bonds. Right there in the collagen, sparing themselves to make the bone stronger, breaking apart and sucking in external energy that would otherwise cause a crack. Like a mother jumping in front of a bullet for her child, or an older brother breaking your fall when you try standing on a chair to reach the top shelf. Scarlett used to take the blame for me when something caught fire, when I was too busy experimenting with life to notice everything charred behind me. She's only 2 years older than me, but already her divine armor has chinks in it. She took responsibility for the cigarettes our mother found in my coat pocket when I was 15, on nights when the roaring insults upstairs were louder than the blaring cartoon dog on the TV. She covered for me when I crept out and hid in the shed. When our father's wrist snapped, his palm cracking across my cheek, she wound her fingers around his neck like it was Play-Doh. And when, in an anger-induced struggle, I left scars on her face where I scratched my nails deep into her flesh, she made up an excuse about falling into some bushes when she was sneaking out, successfully keeping our parents' critical gaze only on herself. I watched her disinfect the cuts with a sad smile on her face, her love in every drop of red growing slowly, spreading like wild vines in the lines of the damp paper towels. She spent too much of her energy on me. In turn, I never got hurt, but I never grew either, a dry stump next to her sturdy ash tree. She's too used to sacrifice. It made her into a desirable friend, employee, partner, human being. She understands things I do not. She has goals and drives and plans, and I don't know what I want, except to be protected by her sacrificial bond again and again. It used to be a team sport between us. We learned what sacrifice was together, giving things up to protect what was precious to us, skinny bodies, pretty faces, a quiet night at home with no screaming father. My sister is beautiful in a way that taught me ugly things can still be precious. Her eyes are too far apart and her lips are so thin that they disappear into her teeth when she talks. But when the sun shines, her freckles dance on her face, do a jovial two-step and foxtrot and glide over the bridge of her nose. In the sunlight, she's beautiful. One day in the summer, when I was braiding her hair and we were humming together on the back porch, she told me she knew she was ugly. I'll have to work twice as hard, won't I? I don't have a charming smile or anything. That's how people get what they want. There are lots of idiots with nice smiles, I said. You're a genius, Scarlett. I felt her as she gulped from a can of warm Dr. Pepper, my fingers at the nape of her neck, as I weaved through her silk hair. I'm smart, but you're smart and pretty. She said this simply, without any bite. I used to hate being called the ugly sister. I didn't try to correct her. What do you want to be, Cora, after high school? She looked back at me from the corner of her eye. I don't know. I tied off the end of her hair. I'll sound stupid if I say something like happy or useful, right? I know you think that stuff's corny. She laughed, her eyes scrunching up like wet paper. As expected, I like that you're corny though, my corny sister. My ugly sister. She smiled back at me, a playful look bubbling in her premature crow's feet. I think I want to be an osteologist or something. Bone science, you know. You creep? Why? You find out so much just from skeletons buried in the sand or in rubble or in caves, like whole histories and families. Don't you think it would be kind of profound if my purpose in life was to figure out what the purpose of life for those creatures were, whose bones we walk on every other day? Profound or morbid. I felt the creases in my forehead deepen. She lifted her arm in front of my face and traced the goosebumps that were forming. I'm getting excited just thinking about it. I wanted to know what it felt like to get goosebumps in July, too. When we were younger, the question was always, what do you want to be? It slowly morphed into, what's your major? Cocooning and growing in a college chrysalis, never ceasing to intimidate me, and then finally, what do you do? The supposed beautiful reveal, the emergence. I think I was too big-boned to properly develop as a pupa, and I jumped into it all prematurely, without ever answering the essential first question. What do you want to be? I hate questions like that. What did my mother want to be? What did my landlord want to be? What did the man who stands outside of McDonald's want to be? I don't think they filled out their senior surveys in blood. Don't think they wrote broke or anxious or homeless as they were picking up their caps and gowns. I surely didn't write dead. Maybe I'll find answers from these bones. They died, so will I. I've decided they're going to keep me company. I shovel the burning sand with my hands and wince until my palms finally go numb and I can proceed without feeling. The bodies living here in this tawny pool on the side of the highway probably don't even belong to any of my ancestors, but I tell myself all humans are connected and keep shoveling anyway. I'm still digging and my sister's words ring through my head. My life's purpose? To die, probably. Not in a suicidal way, but in a way that triggers rebirth and release and resurrection in someone else, like my sister, whose purpose is to explain the lives of the dead while she stands in the lab all day. A 9 to 5 sounds like torture, and I've decided I'd rather bury myself alive. I'll be useful to her. It'll be just like a part-time job. I keep digging. 1 fistful of sand for every year of college I had to go through. 1 grain for every $1 of debt, 1 fried, shriveled sun spider for every failed interview, all the same desert color as the walls of every apartment I've ever lived in. The bones are buried deeper than I thought. I haven't hit anything yet. There's dirt in my eyes, though, and the sweat from my brow is dripping down in my eyelashes, and when I blink, they mix and create a thin layer of mud over my pupils. My hands are dry and cracked, and I wonder how long it will take for my flesh to melt and rot and seep down into the cracks of the earth. I pause to catch my breath. This is the hardest I've ever worked for something. My hands lie flat on the ground as I lean forward and let sweat fall in droplets and darken the sand. It's vibrating. The bones are getting closer, dancing in sync like my sister's freckles and my dry tongue behind my teeth. Bending down until my lips and forehead hit the sand too, I whisper to the bones and try to soothe them. I can tell they're restless and waiting to finally meet me. I think I hear them whispering back. This is how I pray. My gods are my bone friends and cousins and distant godfathers who can give my sister everything I haven't been able to. It's difficult to breathe. There's a hitch in my throat as I try inhaling to alleviate the pressure in my lungs. Gritty flakes of earth scratch my teeth and throat and tongue, but I force myself to keep digging anyway, to blindly dig as mud and tears flow freely and frantically from my eyes. Inhale, dig, exhale, dig. There's a cramp in my abdomen. Everything is too hot. When my sister and I were younger, 13 or so, we were prohibited from speaking to each other and eating carbs. Not because of our parents or our teachers, we just started worshiping the same glossy monthly magazines at the same time. Sisters by blood and by starvation, we spaced our days perfectly between meals. The way the pizza crust tasted after 5 days of only water and saltines was loud enough to substitute for conversation, and we moaned into it. We ate entire boxes in one sitting. We drank the red sauce and let the melting cheese tie its way around our arteries and asses. Showing skin was forbidden until we met our goals, so when we were alone, we took off our clothes and looked at where the pockets of fat sat low on our hips. We vowed to follow the rules next time and not eat so much pizza. We slapped at the new stretch marks on our upper thighs, left our palms vibrating in our bones. There was a wardrobe full of bright pink sweatsuits, and we stuffed ourselves into them to hide our curves. When we stepped out into the world, into the ossuary that was our reality, and stood in the donation line to give our bodies up to a greater cause, to jobs and boyfriends and social lives, we looked out of place. I felt right at home, walking amongst all those who were dead around me, standing upright and shuffling onto the subway and into the office and into stiff beds. And my sister looked at me with curious eyes, searching for our old tribes and past lives in the protruding ribcage and bumpy spine. She suddenly became a scientist studying my body. She started healing and eating and coping while I continued to rot, my stomach sinking farther into my bones. The glint in her eyes was bright, intrigued and fearful as my bone coliseum continued to rise in front of her. I was spread out on an examination table, and she thrived. She studied, she stood tall, she learned words, she ate pizza. She became interesting and important and needed in her field of study. I was useful to her. My purpose was to help her fulfill hers, despite her worried hands, always pushing the plate toward me. Now it's her job to study the bones of the dead, and I'm not useful to her like this. I need to die in a more physical way. I think about what she said about her life's purpose being to find the purpose of other lives. Why couldn't I do that too? I've tried so many times to sacrifice myself to her so she could study more, so she could be with me all day, but I always back out just in time. The kids in the neighborhood would call me a bitch if I used anything other than my fists. When I was growing up, everyone settled everything with hands only, so if you caught me with a gun, it's only because I was taking yours from you and tucking it safely into the dumpster. It stuck with me, and that day, one hot day, my sophomore year of college, I really felt like using my fists. I took a walk, and a cop asked me where I was going, how I was doing today. Wasn't the weather nice? I couldn't punch him, but I balled my hand into a fist and let my fingernails tell my palm what was up. I'm going to my friend's house. I'm doing okay. We have to study for a test. Yes, I love when it's sunny, but I don't think I'll get to enjoy it much today since I'll be studying. He patted his fat gut and smiled. Stay in school, study hard. I wish I did. Yes, I wish you did too. If you'd gotten another job, I'd be able to punch you, and the blood pooling just on the surface of my skin, where bruises the shape of my fingernails are forming, would burst all over your suit or lab coat or collared Verizon wireless shirt. He asked what I was majoring in, and I thought right then, I loved a man in uniform, and maybe he could be the perfect one to kill me. And maybe, since he was handsome, I could punch him and let him shoot me, and I would be okay with him getting away with murder, because at least he was sexy. Instead, I smiled and was nice because I was weak. He walked away and I cradled my fist in my hand all the way home and washed it in the sink, polished it with Neosporin and rubbing alcohol. I wrapped it in satin and put it on the top shelf behind the old scrapbooks and shoe boxes and saved it for later. I wondered if I'd ever be able to use my hands to get what I wanted. I'm still not sure about the logistics of burying oneself alive, even now as I finally dig deep enough to see dusty skeletons peeking at me. I've done enough. I found someone to keep me company, someone I can learn from. When they find me, days from now probably, my sister and my mother and the cops, I'll already be suffocated and smelly, and my flesh will probably be tender enough to rip from the bone easily. I hope my sister's eyes sparkle, and she won't even remember that she hasn't returned my calls in a month or seen me in 2, and as soon as she digs me up again, she'll remember who I am, and she'll love me for my sacrifice, just like I loved her for hers. I crouch into the hole, taking a handful of dirt from the surface with me, watching as streams of it escape from between my fingers. As it falls dryly on my leg, the puffs of dirt that rise in the aftermath taste nothing like cinnamon, nothing like the pan of cinnamon buns I binge eat after work on Fridays. I feel the bones underfoot trying to poke their way through the soles of my boots. The calluses on the heels of my feet rub themselves into my sweaty socks in search of moisture. My toes chafe. The brown sugar, it's getting on my tongue and in my grimy eyes. I blink once and the world is brown, twice and it's technicolor, my pupils blown wide into stained glass goggles. I feel scorpions in my mouth, or dragonflies, wings flapping, traumatized as they fall down my throat and find a stomach cave too small and too empty to settle in. I lift myself to the edge of the hole and pull as much of that powder in as I can with my tired excavator arms. I hug it close to my body and fall back in, back on my knees. The bones clatter. They are reforming under and around me, Ossian crop circles hidden under feet of tightly packed moon sand, trying to find a way to glow dully in the desert. A welcome party for me. The bass of the music assists me in covering myself. The grains move in waves, vibrating against each other, making hush noises as they crash together in the crescendo of the desert synth humming underground. The sand is at my neck now, then my mouth. I'm almost covered and I chew on the muddy Friday night cinnamon roll mess until my throat is swollen shut. A comforting bone finger curls around my pinky, telling me it's okay, tugging me deeper. It feels like my sister. My eyes water and I try looking up at the sky before I blink again and it goes black. Okay, so the next reader is someone I am very lucky to have been able to work with for the past 3 years. She's constantly inspiring me with her gritty, natural, and sometimes really scary work. Her extreme attention to detail and like the insane amount of hours she puts into everything she does definitely shows in this collection. Every piece she writes is an experience felt in the body or brain or some other magical extension of the self. Every time I read her work, I feel compelled to thank her for being a writer. Kylie,
Alright, so I have 3 pieces because all my stuff is really short. So the first thing I have for us is a flash fiction called The Lovers. She starts with his thumb. Really, it begins innocently. They're in the kitchen, making dinner, beef stroganoff with green beans and rice and rolls. He splashed some of the sauce on himself while trying to do that impressive chef lifts the pan and swishes the stuff maneuver. She laughed at him, swept her finger up his thin t-shirt and tongued off the collected sauce. He liked that, so she sucked some off his wrist, licked slowly up his hand until encompassing his thumb, in her lips, tongue swirling. And then she just bites. Absent-mindedly, unplanned, on accident, by instinct. He doesn't even register the penetration at first, still gazing at her with lusty wonder, until she chews and swallows. It's all over from there. She is kissing him before he can get the scream fully out, nibbling his lips until they too slide down her throat in wet, mushy chunks, like sushi. It's probably the shock that makes him weak. He flails and whacks at her like a madman, swinging his blood all over the cabinets and the freshly set table. But she jumps up to straddle his waist, still eating his face and clawing at his back, and he goes down like a sack of potatoes. He tries to yell, to cry, to sob even, but there is too much blood streaming down his throat, clogging breath. He's practically drowning. She chugs the small geysers of sputtered and resputtered blood into her own throat. Between his choking and gurgling and her squirting chomps and satisfied moans, neither hears the kitchen timer go off to turn the beef. After his mouth and cheeks, she takes his neck, again starting so innocently, laying thick purple hickeys into his skin. Then his collar is just too tantalizing. Her teeth crack into bone like a knife to microwaved butter. She sucks harder on his marrow than she ever did his dick. Her eyelids are sunk shut in ecstasy, her palms rubbing his shoulders and sliding down to his chest. Fingertips circle nipple and she moans louder, trailing her mouth down further to take the other one in, and he could almost get an erection until she bites straight through his shirt and flesh. She digs her chin into him, ignoring her growing lockjaw as she scrapes his stringy pectoral muscles. Gyrating against his thick thighs, she uses her nails to open his gash wider and pushes two of her fingers inside, pulling out veins and tissue to shovel onto her waiting tongue. She keeps at this for hours, just eats and comes and eats and burns dinner. She only stops once to beat the smoke line into silence and then fondle herself while sucking from her molars and sloppily licking from her dripping gums. He isn't completely consumed, parts of limbs and organs left untouched or only tasted, but she is too exhausted and full to think of breaking out the Tupperware. She passes out into a food coma, slick with sweat and blood, right on top of him, nestled in between licked clean ribs, resting her panting head on his uneaten left shoulder. And the next one is a poem called Passing in the Night. 1. Theirs. She kissed her for the last time. The moon pulled the water high on the earth. It was an erosion heartbreak, slower and less painful than tsunami. The dirt muddied and the tide muddied. Slick versus grainy, a transfusion. Palms parted, glances swayed, two drowned smiles and dim reflected sunlight. The moon released the water low again, and the earth dried. Rain cycled, and each were clean again. 2 hours. A hurricane hit me the night after my baptism. I couldn't see the moon or the earth, just sick water everywhere, a drowning smile. My lungs swallowed the blood from my cuts, but still the water was thicker. I was muddied, exsanguinated. We kissed for the last time in the eye of the storm. The second coming spit me out in the eye of the Bermuda Triangle. Fog lifted, and my island, unpolluted, was the lighthouse. And then my last piece is a prose poem called The Songstress and the Siren. The sun has set underneath the water's crest, and the moon has risen on the ocean floor. She slithers up the current to unleash her tongue, and her serpent tail shimmers closer to the surface, tentacle tendrils of silver hair waving in the water. She knows her role here, is ready for the ship emerging from salty fog. Perched on prow, a frozen image of herself, wearing tender eyes and a lifted chin, holds a shiny lantern. She blows a kiss to the figure, extinguishes the light. Her skeleton scales crinkle as she propels her leaf shape forward. She is not the finned wooden angel leading the sails closer. She is the disenchantment, and prepared to take no prisoners. On board, her lullaby haunts men into floating over the sides and splashing downwards. The sea smacks at their gasping faces, and she takes their breath. She inhales their wet exhales, weaves them into her thrall. By the time they can finally see her glowing dark in the waves, most are dead. The ship ebbs closer to her concert space, echoes her into the night. Only the sour ocean water spilling into human throats and rhapsody out of hers is heard. Closer now, her lidless eyes meet the unblinking pair of the mermaid hoisted on the vessel's apex. They share no kinship, yet she can see herself pinned there, drowned in the air, voiceless, boneless, still. This man-made and massive mirror cannot be her friend, cannot understand her purpose, belongs more to the sailors than the sea. In this she cannot comprehend herself. So she dedicates the last sailor's song to the carven sister Siren, an elegy, an ending. And finally, I have the grand pleasure of introducing Madeleine Sardina. My admiration for Maddy is only slightly clouded by her being one of my best friends, but mostly she is just really and truly a so incredibly talented and kind and impressive and exceptional person and writer. Her work never fails to make me feel both calm and chilled. And whatever narrative voice Maddy found in herself, it knows all. It has the authority of a fable, but the mystery of an old god, and I cannot wait to see y'all's socks knocked off by her.
So I'm going to read one fiction piece. It was just published in Entropy magazine.
Say that louder.
It was in Entropy magazine last week. It's called Grandchildren of the Singularity. I was there first. I remember the singularity. I remember how everything that is known was crunched together, placed on the head of a pin we couldn't see. You call it the Big Bang, but it was more of a birth. We were pressed against the walls of our first home and burst forth into the unfathomable nothingness. The first breath the universe took expanded into a gasp and a scream, and then sudden silence as the vacuum encompassed everything. My siblings were matter, space, time, gravity, and energy. They spread quickly, burning up the nothingness. Matter took shapes, round bodies that glowed. He was atoms and molecules, things that had never touched each other, even in the cramped home in which we had gestated. He built the suns first. He spat out hydrogen, helium, clouds of gas, and gravity clung to those particles. She forced them together, her warm fingers like a cage around each new piece. She crushed them into a density that spilled out in tendrils of heat. She and matter spun around each other in those first million years and made galaxies, the first grandchildren of the singularity. Space stood between them. She was soft and dark, her eyes filled with the fullest emptiness that existed. When the chaos of that birth became too much, she broke the rage that made it all boil. She was what ended our incubation. She grew too fast and tore the walls of our womb. She spilled us out of our mother. She could not stop her own growth, and even in this new universe, she continued to spread and separate all of the things my siblings made. She has not stopped. She shows no signs of doing so. We were all born at once, all expanding at the same rate, but the youngest was time. None of us knew him in the singularity, but when we were born, he was with us. He was small and unknown, but began work immediately, aging each of us in the things we made. Space nurtured him, taught him of the things before, but time grew quickly and outstripped his sister. They fell apart, or perpendicular, only forced together again when your kind found them. Energy wrapped around us all. They were in everything. They made matter move, they made space grow, they brought the heat and the crushing weight of the vacuum. Energy was made of rage and excitement. They burned through everything with vengeance, screaming for our scattered mother. They wanted to be wrapped back up in the weight of the singularity. You first called me a dark star. I was the last of us to be found. Matter and space could be seen. Time and gravity could be felt. Energy filled every pore of the universe and melted it all together. I was the impossible. I contained what they all left out, nothing. And where there was something, I swallowed it and made it my own. I am what is left of our mother. I am black holes and dark energy and all the space between space. I fill the cracks of the universe. The six of us are what made everything. In the instant of our own creation, we began to create, or they did. I began to destroy with the destruction of our mother. In the first mega-atom, energy was rage. They fought against boundaries that did not exist in our new universe. Energy drove space forward into new territory, looking for the pressure that would bring them back to the level our mother had forced on them. They were still young and filled with fire. My center was frozen like ice, cold diamond, but I wanted to be more than I was. I wanted to do good like gravity in space. I was not yet too afraid to hide. Energy sought me out. They knew what I had taken from our mother. They remembered me from the womb. They caught me watching the combustion of a hydrogen atom, quick and catastrophic. You contain, they said to me. You, like our mother, hold. I stayed quiet. Energy was my sibling, part of the sextuplet family that made the universe together. But I knew to them I was young and malleable. You must contain me, they said. I am drowning in this vastness. Inside our mother there had been restriction. The singularity was infinitely dense and infinitely small. It crushed in on itself constantly. While space had needed room to grow, energy had thrived in that mode of potential, of vibration rather than movement. This open universe was too much. It was constant stimulation, no rest, no renewal. Please, they begged, swallow me up. I did. I tried. But I was still so young. My jaw unhinged, welcoming the heat and shattering motion energy poured into me. Pieces of them dripped like the molten substance that made the suns. I imagined this is what my mother felt, utterly full. And then it became too much. I could swallow light, heat, pieces of space and matter, but energy moved. They burned. They singed my insides. I didn't even know I had an inside until suddenly it was on fire and I was regurgitating energy's body. Too much, I told them. You are too much. They shrieked into the cosmos and billions of stars imploded, bringing with them iron and oxygen and coursing nebulae. I felt energy all around me and for a moment imagined that I would be crushed by them, crushed by something for once more destructive than I. But then they shrank, weak, defeated, cruel. You are no sibling of mine, they said. You are only a piece of my mother, her torn skin, her void hide. You are part of what killed her. I sank into space's skin. I remembered being inside our mother's womb. I remembered feeling energy's heat, a kind, suppressed warmth then, between me and the walls of our home. But now I was too weak to provide energy with what they needed and too strong to provide the universe with anything else. I slipped away quietly while energy burned. Our first children began to collapse. They condensed, fierce and kinetic. Energy set fire to the oxygen and iron born from the crumbling stars. New silicates like mica and feldspar and quartz were made, combusting on contact. The whole universe watched as matter and gravity cracked particles of stardust and poured out trillions of planets. Yours was born from this combustion. Your neighbors too, as they whirled around the ball of hydrogen that is your sun, pieces of iron and nickel brought together by gravity and crushed into a sphere. She tried to be gentle, tried to mold them like new clay, but energy, still in mourning of our mothers, swung their arms in fury and shattered those new bodies with ease. The sparks of each collision made the asteroids, two belts that wound between erratic orbits. Each rock glowed orange and red, and some glowed blue with an oxygen-sparse heat. For millions of years, they pounded against one another, flung through space and warped by gravity. Then energy's rage cooled, and the universe with them. The molten rock of your home crusted over, the orbits calmed. The galaxy's arms, reaching out for their mother, space, curled into themselves, and everything took its place in the universe. You were not born yet. You would not be born for 9 billion years. I watched your planet settle. I was there when it began. It looked so like your moon, cold and barren. Your sun was fond of it, I saw. It wrapped those long magnetic arms around the small gray thing and made your atmosphere thick and warm. Water rose, drowned the earth, actually. From my view, safely away from anything that might further grow, it was blue. A blue body made of diamonds and liquid metal. You started in that blue, that ink, that humid world. You were tiny at first, but I saw you still, specks of light in the depths. I wanted to be closer. I knew it would destroy you. So I stayed far. I watched your birth, a strange thing. I saw your microbial ancestors float in the vast ocean that consumed your planet. The waves then were massive and crashed against each other rather than land. The moon was far closer then, and the two globes pulled hard at each other. But you only drifted. You had no legs, no arms, not even fins. You were small and useless, and still you grew. Your eyes came first, soft spots that sensed light and drove you far from the ultraviolet your sun radiated. And then came fins, flat, slender, flatworms and other platyzoa. You moved on your own now, hunted, reproduced with one another. Your family had grown old. My family had grown old and distant. We had been alive more than 13 billion years. You were hardly a quarter that, but it wasn't even really you yet, was it? My siblings had forgotten about me, or I thought they had. They had left me alone at least, to find my own way. None complained when I sucked in the light of a distant star that passed beyond me. None complained when an asteroid caught in my pole slung through my event horizon and was crushed inside me. None complained when a white dwarf slept beside me and let me siphon off some heat that I might pretend was my own. I was allowed to exist in peace. I appeased myself by watching you. You had legs now. You walked on land, on all fours, on two. You had young. Your young made no destruction like ours. They were soft and weak. They moved like energy, but when your young collided with an immovable object, they simply stopped. Your young became you, and your kind grew curious, always looking up at us without ever seeing us. You called us new names: Atem, Kukulkan, Brahma, Cronus, God. You aged quickly from there. You fought amongst yourselves, but what siblings didn't fight? You sent sharp things into space. You studied her while she studied you, wary of what you might bring. Violence, she thought, destruction, pollution, as if she could ever be filled to capacity. You learned about her, and with your far-seeing eyes, you caught glimpses of me hiding behind the ghosts of long-dead stars. I feared you would shrink back, like everything else did when confronted with me, but you came closer. You aimed your sharp things at me, your explorative devices, and found something new. It takes things apart, you said, with wonder, not with fear. It peels apart suns, it peels apart light. It sits at the heart of our galaxy and pulls. It should not exist, but it does. You sent a tiny creation, and I, too close, and of course I destroyed it. I had killed so many huge things already that this shouldn't have mattered, but I choked around its tiny body and tried to pour apologies out of myself where nothing else would emerge. But unlike energy, unlike matter, unlike any of my siblings, you did not resent me. You spoke softly amongst yourselves, and then with the lines and colors brought back to you by that eye, you told me that I was not solely a destroyer. I, too, controlled the creation of the galaxies. In 13.5 billion years, you were the first to tell me how my crushing power made. My family did not hold the same fondness for you. Matter complained about your waste, your sheer luck of survival. Never mind that the same things that he used to make stars also made your skin and heart and skull. Time moaned that you used him too lavishly. Never mind that you had found more use for him than had any of us. Gravity and space feared your explorative spirit, wishing you would only stay on your planet, a mote of dust within our realm. And energy envied you more than anything else. The restrictions life had forced upon you were what energy craved, and when they watched you, they soured and burned inside. I was the only one who watched you from the cosmos and found joy in your growth. I wanted to know you, and somehow you wanted to know me more. You sought me out, sought out your own destruction, and for the first time since the universe was made, I thought perhaps something good might survive me. Next up is an author whose work does not fit into the confines of genre. Her fiction and nonfiction bleed poetic language. She can describe the maceration of a body and leave you hopeful by the end. Each piece is visceral in its details, poignant in its emotionality, and cuts the subject to the bone with its unforgiving depictions. She's been published in Glyph and Jackalope magazine and started her own literary journal last year called Blood Tree Literature. Please welcome Brantlee Reid.
Hi, I'm going to be reading a hybrid. It's called Sever the Head from the Body. It was a phone call that brought Lido to his knees, the ability to stand evading him with the delivery of each injurious word. Marianne is dead. His first and only scream brought Jackson to the storm door in time to witness his grandfather crumple into the driveway, motionless except for the stutter of his chest, and there he laid amidst a sprawl of splintered plastic, both the phone and himself dissected upon impact. He was hardly recognizable, for his staple smile that hinted at the coming of a joke was entirely demolished, inverted and gaping in quiet agony. And he couldn't speak, messenger tongue caught in the rebellion of the body, content to relinquish and idle forever thereafter. Her husband's strange display brought Lita to a fever never before provoked in the presence of her grandchildren. Leveling her tone, gleaming with anxiety, she ushered Jackson to the table. "I'll go check on Lito. Stay with Camilla, okay? Just stay right there. I'll be right back." Jackson promised with fingers crossed. He trailed her by tiptoe, resumed his position at the window, and watched the scene outside unfold. Lita knelt down and with quivering hands on his ribs pleaded, "Chaos, chaos," with the same desperation she cries when her grandchildren stumble up from the arroyo jeweled in cacti. And now she wants her husband to spit out what's breaking him. Within the hour, the house was choked with the children of cousins, uncles, aunts in black, while outside their parents communed around Lito, still fetally curled. Some assumed similar forms on the steps or under the great pine that shadowed them all, weeping, swiveling their heads side to side, all weak in the knees. Inside, a movie played with no one around to watch, everyone too busy playing tag or duck duck goose or hide and seek or some game Jackson had long ago exhausted. Abandoning his place at the table, he slipped upstairs and cracked the bedroom window, letting the disembodied whispers of family waft throughout the room. Marianne had a heart condition. It probably didn't take much. At least she was asleep when it happened. How are we going to tell the kids? But she seemed so happy. Who's going to take Red and let perpetual light shine upon her? Amen. 2. Saturate the flesh. Jackson didn't cry at the funeral. Neither did Camilla. They clutched stuffed animals, a bear, a tiger, gifted to them by an aunt as if the toys were thumbstones. If they needed just right, squeezed hard enough, maybe they would forget about the mahogany box 2 feet away, displaying their mother looking more alive than she had in months. They didn't flinch when the priest took them to the pulpit, faced the sullen sea of blackness, and said, "God bless her children. Pray so that they may know Christ and turn to him when they feel at loss. Pray so that they remember their mother as she was, a selfless, religious, free-spirited woman. And though she may have been led wayward by temptation, we will refuse to immortalize her in this memory, but instead rejoice her unforgettable virtue and raise up the beautiful children she has left behind." This temptation that no one dared mention, the cause of it all that swung into their lives like an uppercut, the source of the downfall they rimmed in conversation because it was too painful to concede, was cocaine. The word tasted sour in their mouths, made their lips pucker closed. They blamed Marianne's boyfriend, Hugo, for introducing her to the stuff, but subconsciously, everyone blamed themselves. If only they had found it odd when her eye bags stayed plumb, or when her weight plummeted, or when she wore closed-toed shoes in the desert summer, to the lake, to the community pool with Jackson and Camilla, or when she would leave them with Lita and Lito for days at a time. At 12 and 8 years old, they didn't understand gravity but knew it had turned off inside of them, their hearts swaying somewhere in their stomachs. And they didn't understand death because it had never related to them before, but from years of mass knew it as object permanence, the theory that their mother still existed beyond that which they could see, hear, smell, touch. They were old enough to tell the difference between flesh and steel and knew the terry cloth lay folded before them in a casket, leaving them to navigate the cold grit of the world without warmth from the only woman who could give it. The ceremony ended once Lita delivered the final eulogy, punctuating the day with maternal heartbreak as she concedes, "She is gone. My baby, Marie, is gone." And with her went the holidays, and every sense to indulge in them. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's passed with little celebration as family gatherings dwindled by halves. Dinners amounted to vigils, and despite the attempts to resuscitate Marianne, retrieving an evergreen from the foothills like the ones she felled annually with Jackson, collectively wearing her ugliest snowman sweaters, antler headbands, making voodoo sugar cookies, her seat at the table remained empty. Children in mind, no one cried until they were alone with their cigarettes. 3. Scrape the face from the bone. With the coming of the new year, Jackson, Camilla, and the puppy, Red, moved in with their estranged father, Jack, a slovenly man of 40 who refused to acknowledge Marianne's death as something new. To him, she had died with their marriage and was buried with the settlement that claimed his kids. Jack renounced ownership with ease, a breakneck forfeiture hardly noticed by anyone, not even Jackson or Camilla themselves. Everything explained to them had been done through vague euphemisms that promised more than they were set to receive. It took a month before they realized their father was never intending to join them in the move. After the divorce, Jack rented an apartment on the other side of town at a distance that bisected the odds of running into his family. His loneliness was supplemented with heroin thanks to his roommate, Mike. They shared the same circumstance and needles, injecting their bodies with fleets of euphoria to override their depression until finally contracting hepatitis C and splitting ways. Once again, Jack was alone, while years of suspended reality piled up sevenfold. He ingested his chemotherapy alone, made the hour-long trip to the radiation ward 4 times a week alone. To assuage the aches, doctors loaded him up with opiates, helping him hoist a flailing white flag. He eventually lost his job and went on welfare, shed all of his hair and emotions and obligations to his kids. Marianne's obituary was the first he'd heard of her since their separation. It was the biggest block on the wrinkled page. Mother of 2 overdoses on Mother's Day. No one had contacted him about taking Jackson and Camilla, but he knew it was coming and was resentful. Bitter at being forced into sobriety, that he was again a father who had to tend to the basic needs of others while he was so accustomed to neglecting those of his own. It felt like the night Jackson was born, when he wanted to ask the doctor for a receipt as she placed the infant in his arms, uncertain as to whether the shoe could ever fit the way it should. For the first time in a decade, Jack proved capable of shadowing himself in abeyance. He sold his collection of pills and got a job through a friend as a janitor at the church down the road, finishing the floors, prying gum from pew backs, stashing the incomplete prayer requests in his pocket. Sometimes he would find familiar names praying for time to heal their wounds, asking how much must pass before they could think of anything else but Marianne. But Jack never took the time to mourn. In all his spite for her, he banished Reid to the backyard after the first cry for affection, and neither Jackson nor Camilla protested. They no longer loved Reid like they did when they first brought him home, palm-sized. They couldn't look in his wanting brown eyes without thinking of their mothers when she held him at the shelter and declared, "This is the one." So Reid whimpered quietly to himself like the rest of them. The house remained still and undisturbed from a lack of breath to rupture the air. Conversations were minimal, and never regarding Marianne. No one talked about her absence because she was still present, plastered across her children's bodies in the hunch of their shoulders and heads when they sat around the dinner table, or when they sauntered back to their separate rooms afterward. She was in their features as they grew into them, her nose and hair and eyes that stared back when they brushed their teeth. But Jackson and Camilla only noticed at Christmases, when relatives would cradle their faces and say, "God, you look just like her," to which they'd reply, "Who?" 4. Pick out the cartilage, flesh out the brain. Despite dragging himself to NA each week, Jack's aim for abstinence was not contagious. Jackson was sent home in his 2nd week of high school, stumbled into the 3rd with slatted eyes, and skipped the 4th altogether to get high on anything and everything obtainable with 2 close friends. Together they rallied for insobriety against parents and teachers and friends, pitying those who couldn't handle their shit the way they could, and instilling themselves with a sense of pride for their ability to escape reality through salvia, heroin and DMT, ketamine and ecstasy and acid simultaneously, the 3 of them thriving on disposable relationships. Jackson was spending less time at home, losing touch with Camilla, and forgetting about his father all over again. And it seemed Jack was forgetting about him too. After a year of moderate effort to keep clean, he was handing over the receipt and making the exchange. He stopped cooking the little he could conjure from the EBT and stopped shaving, doing, caring. Jackson's absence allotted him time to neglect any sliver of him that was ever parental. It gave him space to get unabashedly stoned. The slack was pulling. There were now 3 children in the house, funneling Jackson into a role beyond his years by proxy. The few hours he spent at home were preoccupied by tending to his father's fast food wasteland or calling to extend deadlines on utility bills, and in the rare chance that Camilla was not at a friend's, checking in to see if her grades were maintaining and, once discovering they weren't, going over middle school math until summoned away by the revving of a friend's truck. He held his authority so long as Jack wouldn't, and when it came time for him to graduate, the weight of the household fell on Camilla. Jackson's education ended with high school. The transition was immediate, moving out and in with his Lido and Lita as soon as the square cap was thrown. Taking Red along with him, though he stayed outside, grew mangled and mean while Jackson took up residency in the 500 square foot converted garage that once housed an 18-year-old Marianne. 5. Repeat. I met Jackson on the come down from his drug spell, 22 and calmer then, rolling dough and washing dishes at a pizza place where I had just been hired. It wasn't long before we started dating, or before I realized he lives in fear that all he loves will be taken from him without warning. And when I see him at his most vulnerable, I fear the same for myself. Thanksgiving, Christmas, detriments, prescience, New Year's. Drunk on celebration, he spots and flags down a green, dilapidating Mercedes. Camilla. We jump in. Her door unhinges with the motion of shutting, and she says, "Great. Another bill I have to pay." She's on her way to a high school party, but can drop us off first. And quickly the us becomes a me, and so it goes. Jackson and Camilla snort cocaine off the console and consider it bonding, their only interaction in months, despite a 2-mile distance between them. Through sniffles, she tells him Jack is in the hospital with swollen extremities. Jackson asks if they should be worried. Camilla mashes up another line. "Maybe. I don't know," she says apathetically. But if anyone was to know, it would be her, Jack's primary caregiver. It's heart-related. It's health-related. The consequence of alcoholism and other addictions, a delay of impact, and now, after 10 years, the shrapnel has sharpened by the recent collision of pills in his liver. Jackson sighs, cuts another for them both. 6. Take out the teeth. A few nights later, I held Jackson's thumb, heartbeat clenching in my hand like his jaw against my breast. Red, the healer with a lump in his neck, was dead in the backyard, rigid in a settled rigor mortis. The other dogs were blind and stumbling over his bloated body like another stone in the yard until Jackson reached for a shovel and gloves in lieu of consolation. I left him alone in his initial stoicism, patient for the weight to compress him, striking heavily with the first upheaval of dirt, and when the sweat stiffened in the creases of his face, wrinkled by grief, he sobbed with the shower, blowing his nose into his palms and afterwards collapsing into my arms, emotionally devoid. 7. Reassemble. It took 2 days for the coyotes to track the scent of the rot. They woke us up with victorious yipping, ripping him up, snapping his tendons in the privacy of night. Tufts of fur spun wildly in the wind as we made our way up the hillside, tracking the undulating braids of paw prints in the sand to find the gruesome disfigurement. Red was half in, half out of the pit. They had picked his limbs clean of carrion, leaving only patches of undesirable flesh. One leg dangled by joint sinews, one sat outside the pit, swarmed with ants, and the other 2 were nowhere to be found. His ribs had imploded, likely used as leverage in tearing the meat away from the stomach, yet his face, lips stuck in a snarl, was unscathed. I went to gather bricks to entomb him, but stopped short of returning, for Jackson was looming over the grave, shovel in hand. When he looks at Red, he sees the last and cancerous relic of his mother strewn across the yard in a ravenous dissection. He thinks this is it, she is wholly gone. But I see how his mother is immortalized in the psyches of her children, who consider their addictions as fate, an inevitability imbued in their bloodstream like defective DNA. She is the heap of red in the side yard. She is the depression through the holidays. She is the thought that Jackson flees when he keeps himself busy with drugs and alcohol. She is the face of the dog untouched until now. With one stab of the shovel, he severs the head from the body.
Everyone, thank you so much for being here. Can we get another round for everybody? If you're in town, please be back
back here a week from tonight at 6, and if you don't live here, you should stay. And we'll keep you occupied until then. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Sorry that I should have been